Hey, welcome to the Articulate Ox podcast. I'm your host, Soma79. Thank you so much for joining me today. My guest is Kate Parnell, and her and I share a love of Garfield. And as anybody who's known me for a long time, and the longer you've known me, the longer you've known this, is that I'm a huge Garfield fan. Garfield is probably the biggest, earliest influence in my life that made me fall in love with drawing and cartoons and comics and all that stuff. And I'm glad we still see Garfield around to this day in many different media and memes and all that cool stuff. Kate has a great story about how she became an artist who works primarily in the media of Garfield. She explains it better than me. So definitely check out this interview, check out her page, buy some art from her, and she's an absolute delight. So thank you so much, Kate, and I'll talk to you. Hey, welcome to the Articulate Ox podcast. I am your host, Soma79. My guest today is Garfield from Memory artist, Kate Parnell. How are you doing, Kate?
Doing all right. Glad to be here.
I'm glad to have you here. So we're chatting a little bit a second ago. Garfield to me was like the probably first art that I ever really absorbed. It was just, it came out around 1977. I was born in 79. And I think I started looking at it around like 4 or 5 years old. And it was the first thing I drew. I drew it on everything when I was a kid. And it was what everybody knew me for.
Did you
um,
find yeah, I know they had little prompts sometimes where they would say how to draw Garfield and the
yes. So I do have I have some different things I'm going to show during the course of the episode, but like I had all these books. I still have like all of them that these have all the weekly comics. And in one of these, there was a little step-by-step one where it showed you how to draw Garfield. And that's where I learned it from. That was basically the first thing I learned to draw on my own. So how about you? What was your introduction to Garfield?
Actually I am from a household where we didn't really read Garfield. My mom's not a big Garfield fan. Um which is kind of ironic now and everything. But yeah, it just wasn't really a part of my I was more Calvin and Hobbes, Snoopy, Peanuts,
Yeah.
all of that.
Calvin and
And
Hobbes and Garfield, there is sort of an Elvis versus the Beatles relationship with that, where it's like people usually either like one a lot more than the other. It's like there's because they kind of really touch different parts of the brain, I think.
it's a very different approach to making a cartoon franchise. I think Waters was it Waterston?
Yeah, I think
The guy
Bill
Waters,
Watterson or something. Yeah, I always
Waters.
get it. Yeah,
I think he stopped eventually because it was so much of a grind and because he didn't want to merchandise. And that's kind of the polar
yeah,
opposite of Garfield, which had its own. I mean, it was its own licensing juggernaut for years until finally it just got bought by Viacom a few years ago.
yeah. It was really one of the first things that I remember being super super merchandise, and I think a lot of people saw these when we were kids on the back of cars. Like this was mine from when I got my first car. But these were all over. These were like baby on board stickers. They're everywhere.
Exactly. Yeah, and everything else had Garfield. I mean, if you look at the range of Garfield merchandise, it's kind of staggering, from like inline skates to back massagers to
Yeah,
every kind of t-shirt imaginable. It's
yeah,
it's it's pretty impressive for a what was at least an independent comic, an independent company for a while
yeah.
to to
It's
be,
fun. Yeah.
you
Like
know
Garfield, sometimes I think of Garfield a little bit like the Dukes of Hazzard, which is like a show that if you looked back at the ratings, you'd be like, oh my God, when the Dukes of Hazzard was on, like like a third of the people watching television were watching it. We got to make more shows like the Dukes of Hazzard, but it's only because there was only four things on. And I think Garfield is one of those things that critically speaking, it's kind of the same jokes over and over again and it hasn't grown a ton, but the merchandising of it and just the different ways they've been able to explore those couple basic characteristics we all know of Garfield have kept it alive for years and years, despite it being sort of like a couple note gag.
well, and it's kept it contemporary in a way because there's still Garfield merchandise coming out, pitched at pretty much every age group out there. I mean, they Garfield was one of the things I love about it was how saturated the market was with Garfield products,
Yeah.
and they've lingered, in people's emotional lives, in their hearts. In a way, people are really have a lot of love for Garfield, and just in the world, there's just a lot of Garfield. I guess
Yeah.
now, new movie coming out and everything. So
Probably, yeah.
I feel like it's a brand relaunch about to happen, and they'll probably sue the shit out of me when it does.
Yeah, you always gotta be careful with stuff like that. It kind of makes me wonder if there was maybe something about the 80s when Garfield kind of became big that me I think human maybe people were just tired after like the 70s and after like Vietnam and after Watergate. They could maybe people could just relate to this cat that was just like had enough and just is like sick of going like sick of Mondays, just wants to eat some lasagna and chill out and be grumpy and kind of run his own roost. I wonder if there was some because like I said before, there weren't as many of these characters that were. I mean, now there's 9 million Pokemons, and I couldn't identify one of them. And there's like all the Dragon Balls and all that stuff. But it's like everybody knew what Garfield was. It was like Snoopy. It was like, and I wonder if there's just something about that of the times that people just were ready to just turn into their big fat cat selves. You know?
Well, it seems like it would vibe with the whole me generation
Yeah,
80 thing, but also just kind of there for a lot of people as children, which is kind of wonderful for me now, getting to interact with all those people who still have this very childlike place in their heart where they just love Garfield.
yeah,
It's just so regenerative for people that love can kind of translate. And I just, that's one of the greatest things for me about having this as my subject, because it's really flexible. People are used to seeing Garfield in all kinds of forms and on all kinds of things, but there's just this general undercurrent of goodwill, which, as a person who has a lot of depression issues and stuff like that, I kind of needed that in my life, and I didn't
yeah.
realize
I can
like how
relate
much.
to that as well. Yeah. That there's something so pure and so just happy about. And I think Garfield in general maybe appeals to the emotion more than appeals to the to like, as an intellectual thing, but it really hits the emotion hard. It really it's comfort food, I think. It's comfort food for the mind to some degree.
Yeah, lasagna for the mind.
Yeah, lasagna for the mind, which actually I think that's my new band name. I gotta write that down. Um so let's talk a little bit about what you do in particular. I don't know that I think I'm just gonna have you describe it because I don't know that what I would say would be accurate or I'm curious to hear how you describe it. But I found your page on Instagram. You do a lot of art that's Garfield related, and I'm gonna let you take the description from there.
Well, really, I kind of, the whole thing started as a drawing project about a little over 4 years ago. And I was coming out of a really difficult time personally. And I had really kind of lost touch, lost faith in my own art. I went to school for art. That was kind of what I always thought I would do. And I just kind of stopped being able to connect. And I thought, I need something to help me get back into the practice of making art. And I was somewhere where there was a lot of Garfields. It was my friend's restaurant. They have like a million little cups, the little lead containing Garfield cups from McDonald's, and
Like these?
yeah, just like that one.
Mhm.
That's your cadmium intake for the year.
Oh, are these things dangerous?
Oh my God, yeah. Don't, I mean, maybe Google it afterwards.
Okay, holy shit. I'm glad we had this talk.
Some of them have like enormous levels of lead and cadmium in the ink. Yeah, you might want to Google that.
Oh my God.
But
Really
also,
saved my life today.
well, also like half the people I have as followers are like, oh, I drink out of those every day. So I don't know. I don't know what that says about it, but
Great. That's why we
corporation,
all like Garfield, is we're slowly killing our brains.
right? But I was somewhere and there was all of these little Garfield tchotchkes and mugs and things, and I was just doodling it, and I remembered that feeling of being a kid and knowing how to draw something from memory, knowing how to sit down and draw this character. And even though I never really was attached to Garfield, I kind of thought it's maybe even better because I won't feel like I'm screwing up something that I'm not emotionally attached to. And I won't feel like if I say I'm doing it from memory, there's no way I had to kind of create this elaborate thing for myself. But I had to, there's no way I could do it wrong. And there is this really empowering feeling. And I didn't need Garfield to be anything in particular. It could kind of be anything.
Right.
And started doing these on the bus on my way to work. And it kind of somehow was, I don't even know how to describe it because I don't really know how it worked so well.
So is the
But
concept that when you say by memory, I can picture it, but I'm having trouble putting it into words because obviously I've seen the pictures. So is it that a lot of the stuff that I saw on your site, it looked like they were, I don't know if these were paintings that maybe you got at thrift stores that you then worked Garfield into, or if some of them are ones you created totally from scratch that you sort of, what's the nuts and bolts of it?
well, originally it was just drawings, and I was kind of trying to stay close to the traditional Garfield cartoon, but the from memory thing was sort of an easy out. If it looked a little funky, I was like, well, it's from memory, so
Right. Yeah.
I remember it. And it gradually started to kind of, it just felt like everything was coming into it. All of the other things in my life, all the music I listened to, and things that my friends liked, and things that people would suggest. I started posting them on the internet, and now what I'm basically doing is either making work and selling it through the Instagram, or taking commissions and making paintings of things that people want to see Garfield in.
Yeah, you
Or
have an impressive following too. Like it's people are very rabid about that.
it's the Garfield social media community is so much bigger than I had any idea about it, really. And there's a lot of people who have been doing similar projects, or have been doing Garfield themed projects for since Garfield's been out there, really.
The one that comes to mind for me is the Garfield without Garfield. Have you seen that?
As Garfield.
Yeah,
And
that's wild.
I love it. And one of the things I really love about it is that Paws Incorporated, which is the merchandising arm, is the Garfield Corporation when it was still owned by
Yep.
Jim Davis.
By Jim David. Yep.
They put out that book, the collection of Garfield minus Garfield.
Oh, did they?
It's an official
I gotta
Paws.
find that.
Yeah. And I really loved that for a lot of the projects like Lasagna Cat or Garfield minus Garfield or the Sorry John thing, they they were really permissive. The Garfield licensing people. I mean, they didn't really come after people in the way that, say, like the Charles Schultz estate has.
Right, right. And they're
Like,
also too willing at this point to sort of poke fun of themselves.
I
And
think so.
yeah, and I think you see that sometimes when like, Star Wars now is a little more willing to poke fun of itself. And I think it helps when these people that are taking all your money have a sense of humor about it. I guess, I don't know.
Well, I think I also realized that the fans are gaining a sort of agency in this, and
Right.
and becoming creators in a way, or kind of a secondary creator themselves, and
Right.
they're much more involved, I think,
And
than they
some of
used
these
to.
brands too sort of need to be updated over time. It's like I don't know if you watched the Saved by the Bell revival they did. It
I
was you did?
I saw a little bit of it, but I
Okay.
just couldn't. It just didn't seem to translate at all
Oh, see,
for
I
me.
really enjoyed it. Like Saved by the Bell was really big for me as a kid. In that I felt like they kind of like they corrected for time and they sort of gave us some of the same stuff we used to love. And I feel like at some point with this stuff, like Garfield has to evolve a little bit in order to keep. And I think the way they evolved is sort of the way the Ninja Turtles did, where it's like, oh, we're just gonna keep putting more costumes on Garfield. We're gonna keep like coming up with new situations to put him into. It's like because he's gonna react the exact same way no matter what situation he gets thrown into. So
Which is that kind of continuity you need for a good running joke, you
right.
know?
because you have to go into it's if you're going to tell a joke in 3 frames, people have to already come in with a lot of information on the first frame. As soon as they see Garfield, they are already jam packed with knowing what Garfield is all about. So, let me see what else. So, like, what I still want to go back to exactly. So, from memory, did you just not look at Garfield? Do you make a conscious effort
Well,
not to engage with Garfield
it's
content?
a misnomer now, or I would say maybe it has kind of a larger.
Let me actually show you something that's is probably a good pivot. This is a toy that I recently picked up. That I don't. Do you know? If you're familiar with MF Doom?
Yeah, there's actually I there's a print of the any of one of his albums, but I
Yeah, maybe this. There's this too with Garfield. That was done by this artist Thumbs that's in the UK that I really love.
uh-huh.
And so this was a toy that I recently picked up. He only made about 100 of these, but he made them all by hand, I guess, and painted them all hand. But it's MF Doom Garfield Metal Claws, and I don't know. I'm surprised at how much of this stuff that they're able to kind of get away with. But that was my favorite little Garfield thing I bought recently.
I think a lot of it is if you're small enough to kind of go under the radar, fly under the radar, or if it's a small enough batch that it's not really worth, you know, like
Yeah.
I'm the work that I do is primarily original art that uses Garfield, but because it's an original piece, it's covered under parody law.
Right. And that's one thing that's very I should make this clear if people haven't seen your art. When you look at it, it's not like the Garfield is almost it's in the background. And it's not like a Where's Waldo situation. It's more of like you're blending the colors and sort of like making part of a drawing in like the stripes that Garfield had and things like that. So it's pretty far away from what you might imagine someone doing Garfield art would be.
Well,
That's
and I guess
fair to say.
that's where it kind of come back to the memory thing. Garfield for me in this project has kind of become uh, it's become a way for me to interact with other people and kind of make these mashups of things that they love. But it's also kind of Garfield isn't as much about, like you said, it's not about the cartoon character. It kind of becomes about the parts of it, like the eyes,
Yeah,
that sort of gaze, or the stripes, or the colors. And it's sort of now it's kind of almost like finding ways to incorporate Garfield into the painting that are not as obvious. And
mm,
sometimes I'm sticking Garfield, like a very cartoony Garfield in there. But I think for a lot of it, it's yeah, it's become a little more of a stretch from the original source.
right. But that's sort of just the way art evolves in general. Is that there's that the period of something becoming bigger and bigger, and then it starts being deconstructed more and more. And it's like you're pretty far down that line of deconstructing what Garfield was, because I mean, it's like you look at one of these beautiful pieces you do, and it's maybe 10% Garfield, 5%, but you still feel all that same emotion. It's really cool.
Well, I appreciate it. I'm glad it translates.
Yeah, I was super pumped when I saw it. It's just, and I just love all the different ways that the character can be adapted and what the character means to so many different people. It's there's so many things now that just bring us down as a society. But I mean, like your point before, I mean, something that's kind of just pure joy and hasn't been totally, infiltrated and destroyed yet.
I mean, to be honest, it's something that I really needed in my life. I needed a way to kind of access um this feeling of joy, and of remembering things from childhood. It's kind of now memory is almost deconstructed too. It's not just I remember the steps to draw Garfield. It's like I remember these feelings. You have
Right.
this plush as a child, and you just invest all of your heart in it in a way. And there's been
100%.
a lately that shows it's this. This is my wife's Garfield plush that she slept with for 40 years, and this is what it looked like new. And it's that loving something that much changes it and changes you. And it kind of
100%.
it's given me a way to kind of access the things that bring me joy in my life, and in a much more meaningful way than I ever expected when I started doing this.
We talk a lot on this podcast. There's a lot of conversations about mental health, and that word joy that you just said a few times comes up a lot. And it's something that I think a lot of people don't think about, is that, there is everyday happiness, and there's just like, oh, like maybe I found a 20 on the street or something like that. But joy is something that kind of tickles your soul in a way. And it's a way that it's happiness that comes with an escape, and it's happiness that has less boundaries, and it's something that hits you deeper, and it's something that over the past, and I struggle with some mental health issues myself, OCD, depression, ADHD, all that stuff, like non-binary, so a lot comes with that. But like you being able to identify joy and then try to find ways to recreate it, for me, helped a lot in my own mental health. So I
Yeah, this really, I would say, in a lot of ways, this project saved my life. I I had I had been about a year away from attempting suicide when I started this project, and I had gotten through it, but I hadn't really figured out a way to keep going past it, you know.
Mhm.
And it I had really stopped painting because I felt like I wasn't able to really access something, it just wasn't, I wasn't able to connect with people with the work that I was making. And this has just kind of been almost like a conduit for me to kind of celebrate the things like painting that are incredibly important to me and that give me joy in my life, and to kind of illuminate the things in other people's lives that are meaningful to them. And so it kind of took something that maybe started a little bit jokingly, or was, I was maybe a little more satirical about it. And now I am really proud to do this for a living. It's like, it seems like the most bonkers job in the world
Yeah.
to like make bootleg Garfield art for like, but it's kind of, I feel like at each stage of this project, it's sort of been like the giving tree, it
Mhm.
it has grown, and it's kind of allowed me to grow, and it's given me tools. Um, so I feel like it's been a huge thing for my mental health.
It's funny in that way. That can only happen when you talk about things from like a long time ago and stuff that hits to your core. You just kind of triggered memory in me, in that. So when I was a kid, I was very depressed. I would have suicidal thoughts probably as early as like 9, 8, 9, 10 years old. I had a lot of issues with that. And it's funny now that I'm remembering, one of the things is I lived in a very small area and my world felt very, very small. And to me, Garfield is one of the first things that showed me that there was something outside of this very small bubble I was living in. And it was something that I'm like, oh, okay, well, maybe I can only see what's in this, house that's surrounded by trees and forest, or in this town that's really small. But there's an address on the back of this thing I love so much, and I know that's out there somewhere. And
Mm-hmm.
and to whatever degree I can I mean, as a kid, disappearing into actually the words and the pictures and whatever, but it gave
Yeah,
me inspiration. It satisfied me in the moment and gave me hope for the future. And I'm feeling those feelings come back as you're saying what you're saying.
just seeing the address on the back and kind of knowing
Yeah.
in your body that there's more than what you're going through at that
Yeah.
moment.
And seeing like a real human being, Jim Davis's signature on it, and being able to recognize that and going like, I
That's
don't
the
know.
He still does the cartoon. He still does the comic every day.
Wow.
That's
It's
the he wanted to keep when he sold Garfield. He wanted
I
to keep
I bet
the
that's sort of like one of those jobs like Pat Sajak has, where it's like, okay, well, we have 32 weeks of a year of original programming. We tape them all a week's worth in one day. So I'm really working like 32 days a year and getting paid this big salary. I bet Jim Davis is knocking those out in like a weekend and being like, all right, time to drink some of those Garfield martinis from my Garfield super like slush cone machine or whatever. I'm nervous about drinking out of this.
I mean, honestly, I have a lot of people that have sent me pictures of themselves because I've posted a few times how extreme the lead levels in those are. People are,
Nice.
so you won't be alone.
Yeah, yeah. I'll be waiting in line for St. Peter with a bunch of other Garfield friends, Garfield fans.
McDonald's too.
Yeah, I know. Oh yeah, the McDonald's. The probably, is it any worse for me than the freaking rest of the Happy Meal that it probably came in? This was something else that a few years ago, my 40th birthday, one of my childhood friends who I've rarely seen since really high school, he showed up and he gave me this little Garfield ceramic thing that says, "Congratulations, you did it." And I think this is funny because this was something that was they don't really make these ceramic type things. This was a very
Yeah,
80s thing for me that you'd see a
yeah.
lot of stuff like this, like, you know, I guess the Garfield
I
Hummel. I don't know.
go with those berries figures. You know what I'm talking about?
Yep.
Those very much like that one.
Yep. With the
Yeah,
hollowed insides and yeah.
exactly. Yeah, yeah. It was really it's really kind of a 70s and 80s thing that I don't know, just not as big these days.
It is kind of funny to me though that somebody who really the last time the person really really knew me, we were under 10 years old, and he shows up at my 40th birthday and actually hits it out of the park with something that I still care about.
That's how I'm doing. You know, you don't lose that love for the things that you love at 10. You
Yeah.
know, in there somewhere, and whether you're Citizen Kane and it doesn't come out until you're about
Yeah,
to
the
cry,
Rosebud. Yeah.
or if it's you do it every day and you're surrounded by Garfield stuff. It's funny how much it lingers.
Yeah. Do you have any memories of the Garfield and Friends cartoon show that was on in, I want to say, maybe the late 80s?
My main memory was watching the terrifying Halloween special every
That
year.
that came in my head a few minutes ago. I was going to mention that up. That really scared me. And I
It
watched it again about a year or so ago and I was like, I can see why.
it's an alarming thing for kids. I mean, I think that maybe like these days they kind of softball it a little bit, but that one with like they're being chased by pirates.
Yeah, I think they kind of have
Oh,
to swim and there's fear of them drowning maybe at one point.
yeah, yeah. Odie saves Garfield
Yes,
from.
that's what it was. Yeah.
That's a lot, you know.
Yeah.
But
They
anyway,
it was
that
that was I was free that goes up there with the Return to Oz and the Dark
yeah.
Crystal and the end of Superman 3 that kind of like ruined for like 3 years of my life when I was a kid.
You're like waiting for those rolling dudes from
The
Return.
Wheelers. Oh yeah, I saw that in the theater. I saw that my mom took me. I was in second grade, and I was like, well, "Where's Dorothy? Where's Toto? Like, what's going on?" And then years later to realize that little girl was Firuza Balk, I was like, "Oh, that's pretty funny."
I know, kind of amazing, right?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah. I asked about the cartoon show because I have another little thing. This was a present I bought for myself for my birthday years ago. The only thing I've ever ordered from Garfield directly is it's a cell from Garfield and Friends,
oh,
signed by Jim Davis. The light's not helping me here, but it's like an original cell from like the cartoon.
and it's an earlier one too, I think,
I
right?
think so, yeah. And the reason I got this one, it's kind of hard to see, is as I mentioned before, Garfield, like, oh, this is probably the best angle to hold it I'm seeing now.
Yeah.
Garfield is it's kind of the same joke over and over again, Odie's dumb, whatever. This is one where if you kind of see their eyes, which is hard to do, Garfield is really wide-eyed and Odie's almost rolling his eyes at Garfield.
So
So
it's
it's one of those few times where Odie's kind of like a little bit like ahead of Garfield or a little sharper than Garfield. And that was the reason why I liked it. Because I
I
always
always
like those comics when they go a little bit off of like the standard.
yeah, very nice.
So I was a big fan of that. It was funny. I found out there was this other comic called Gru the Wanderer. It was a comic book that was what got me into comics. It was kind of a silly comic, like it was a Conan the Barbarian parody, essentially. And
Uh-huh.
that was what got me into comics. And they're still publishing it today. It was done by this guy Sergio Arnone. I always get his name wrong. Sergio Arnone. I don't know. You'd probably recognize his style. He's drawn in every issue of Mad Magazine ever, and he's
Uh-huh.
like the fastest cartoonist ever. But the guy who wrote all those cartoons also wrote all of most of Garfield and Friends.
Oh,
So
wow.
there was this one dude that was, I think, up in New Hampshire that was doing everything that I loved, and I never realized those two worlds were being done by the same guy. I mean, it's like it makes you feel like there's very few jobs and like tough to get them if like one guy has all the good ones. But
Well, it is also was it the Garfield and Friends that had Lorenzo Music?
yes, Lorenzo Music and his voice, I think, really that
That's what.
really sold it.
Yeah. When I
Like,
hear if I read Garfield, the voice I hear in my mind is Lorenzo Music's voice,
yeah.
which really embodied everything about it to me.
It did, and it's Bill Murray esque, and I think that was one of the reasons why Bill Murray eventually was the later Garfield after Lorenzo Music passed away. But it I think that the Garfield and Friends in like, well, I guess before that was those specials, but I really do think that it was his voice that really made it that much more endearing because
Hmm.
I it's like I don't know that I ever read the comic prior to that, and I don't know what I hear in my head, but I definitely hear that in my head when I read Garfield.
Yeah, yeah, 100%.
It's also weird too because the actual conceit of Garfield is something that when I think about kind of breaks my brain. Is that we talked about the Garfield without Garfield thing, but if we're to believe the world of the comic, John can't actually doesn't know what Garfield is saying ever because so either because Garfield isn't speaking, he's thinking all the time.
Right.
So John really, but you do see them basically having conversations sometimes. But so I guess that's just sort of it's a cartoon, so you sort of whatever. But it's easy to sort of read the comic and just sort of read it as them communicating with each other. But then when you
Hmm.
realize that, oh, like for some
He
reason Garfield knows what John is saying, but John doesn't know what Garfield is saying.
right.
I guess is how it breaks down. I don't know.
Yeah, the Garfield minus Garfield really, really, it,
It's chilling.
it really just becomes psychologically weird after a few of them. And you start unpacking that side of the equation. Who was
Yeah.
this? He's living with these animals that have this rich interior life that he knows nothing about. And he's walking around in like those crazy plaids and giant bow tie. I just like, I guess, is it a self portrait by Jim Davis?
Right.
It's it.
Because then it's the guy's
What?
name is Jim and his job's a cartoonist as well.
So I
It's
kind
like
of,
the snake eating its own tail, like or the lasagna eating its own pan. I don't know. Uh, so like what so you mentioned before you didn't really come from a Garfield house. What was it for you as a kid that really captured your imagination? Like, in like something that may be similar to how Garfield did for me. Did you have anything that really you
I
attached to?
I read a lot, um, and I would have these really elaborate imaginary stories that I would kind of be thinking about all the time. I guess I used to really look forward to going to bed because there was that 15 minutes or so before I'd fall asleep and I could
Yeah.
just completely go into my head. Um, and then, later on, I think I started to get into things like Mad Magazine and I read a lot of like pulp sci-fi. Like there used to be a great used bookstore that had all of these like 60s and 70s incredible stories and
Yeah.
all those little pulp magazines with like Ray Bradbury stories and early Asimov and stuff.
And a lot of those things too. So sorry to interrupt. Like I had bought something, if you know who Jack Kirby is.
Yeah.
All right. So I had bought some prints off of Jack Kirby's grandson, Jeremy, who now kind of runs keeping Jack's memory alive. And in them, he sent me one of Jack Kirby's old books, and it was one of those pulp sci-fi ones. And like I didn't recognize any of the authors' names in it, but it was from maybe the 40s or 50s, and they were all excellent stories. And it makes you sort of forget sometimes that we remember maybe 10 names from an era, but there were hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people doing interesting things that didn't may not have caught on like a supernova, but there's so much cool stuff out there that hasn't
and
been touched in years.
too super weird stuff that
Yeah.
like stories will just be it kind of a thin premise for a book, but for a story it's like, okay, you're like on a boat with like a talking broccoli and like like a dog-headed man, and and you're on some foreign planet, and like it's just like, oh, okay, I don't know,
Yeah.
like the fuck did you get that from? But like I kind of like now, especially, I'm like, I like the ones that are a little more obscure or just plain weird, you
Yeah.
know?
And you think about who those people must have been. That, there was a lot of, and, if you're talking about the 40s and 50s, you had to be pretty brave to be yourself in public. And I'm betting a lot of those are probably pen names as I'm saying this.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
like, what is the life that, like, this is somebody who maybe if it's a pen name, maybe they had to live their day to day acting like one thing, but this was their only way to sort of express these weird thoughts. Cause it's like, I sometimes think that if I got dropped into that era in my like, yo, this is my throwback Brewers hat. This is my friend Hush Harding. I'm wearing his hoodie. Like, how do I like communicate? Like, and
yeah,
like these people, like now we get to be who we want to be. We have that sort of permission to whatever degree. Back then, having to sort of make yourself smaller and find those little nuggets to like connect with the world must have been, I don't know, must have been trippy.
yeah. Well, it's really, I mean, it's kind of amazing when you find the little things like that that are sort of escape hatches for people, or they're kind of wormholes into somebody else's head from 50 or 80 years ago.
Yeah.
Recognize that, hey, there were people that kind of had weird lives and were making weird work, and like there's a feeling of solidarity, at least,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
like it's we can be
Yeah.
out
And it's I'm wondering now, I was thinking about some different things I've seen about public domain. Garfield can't be that, or is it 50 years? Or maybe it's 100 years
there. Oh,
in terms of, yeah,
yeah,
it's a
oh yeah,
while. The Mickey
and
Mouse stuff has been interesting. And like there's that new Winnie the Pooh movie that's a horror movie because that's pretty
yeah,
wild. Like it's a fun era to be getting into.
yeah, I think the Mickey Mouse thing, now didn't they like introduced a new Mickey Mouse, so they
Yeah, so I think it would be only like Steamboat Willie that would at first be available in public domain. Though if I remember correctly, they've always found some way to sort of push it off. I mean, if you're following the news at all, the whole relationship between Disney and the state of Florida is a pretty wild premise to begin with, and just how they're fighting over
yeah,
all that stuff. So Disney somehow has some way of extra special power.
I'm not a Disney fan, but I do find it fascinating that they're kind of the ones fighting the hardest, or
Yeah.
not fight, let's say, but they're an impediment to what's taking over this country, and I always kind of thought Disney was real, these days was just kind of commercial, and didn't, I'd never have really connected with anything past like 1980 from Disney. So
There was a movie that some independent filmmakers made about maybe 15, 20 years ago called Escape from Tomorrow, I think, or Escape from Tomorrowland, where they shot in all the Disney parks without permission. And
mhm.
they went in there and they told a story about a family that was there, and the father was getting like distracted by these young women that it was catching his eye, and then it kind of spins out some really weird stuff from there. But it was all shot inside the Disney parks, and it wasn't until like they shot it in each park like over a period of time, and they didn't really figure out what was happening until the end. And in the end, they had enough to stitch this film together that's available now to see. And it is really weird to see this entire other side of Disney where it's like you never see, like, everything you see of Disney shot in the parks is shot through the filter of Disney. So it's the first time
Yeah,
you ever really seen it, and it's all in black and white. But and then
it's
Disney, they either
our,
could, I think it's called Escape from Tomorrow or Escape from Tomorrowland, one of those two. But like Disney just did never went after them legally because they realized if we do, everybody will know about this, and if not, there'll be some random guy on a podcast telling someone about it 15 years later, and like nobody will know about it, and that's what happened. But it's really a
yeah,
fascinating watch.
wow, that's it. I definitely, I go back and forth being concerned about that sort of thing. I mean, honestly, I'm kind of, if Viacom wants to crush me, I'm pretty crushable.
Yeah,
I'm like
yeah.
broke 43-year-old weirdo who
What are
lives
they
with.
coming for? It's like
Yeah, what
I
are they gonna?
think I think too a lot of what it is that like if you're doing something well enough, they may come after you just to incorporate your idea or something. And it's like, I don't think the way and I honestly, I probably come, I hate even saying this, but I probably come closer to the type of issues you're talking about. I've gotten a cease or desist or two in my day,
Mhm.
over stuff. But your stuff is really, it's really in the distance. And I think it really does qualify as parody. I think it's not,
I
I would, I mean, I'm
Yeah.
not, this is not me giving legal advice, but it really feels like it, it's,
Well, I've always said that my legal strategy is the first sticker I made up, which just said like it had Garfield's head, Garfield's severed head, and it said, "I'm not Garfield, I'm Garfield from memory," and that's basically my only legal defense. But I think with the original art, I'm pretty safe. I think there's
yeah.
a lot of precedent out there. Um, it's things like prints and T-shirts, which I have a big cartel and I sell some merchandise. That's what I would probably, they'd probably just send a cease and desist and I take it down.
Yeah.
You know.
That's what happened. I had some with it's funny, you see some companies are really big on it and some aren't. Like I found that DC Comics, or probably Warner in general in particular,
Mhm.
they've dinged me on something. And for some
Or
reason I keep seeing this Pac-Man thing here.
yeah,
They I guess for some reason they dinged me on something I did at some point,
uh,
but I don't know. It's not, it's like they're not, these companies also know, they're just like, hey, just take it down, there won't
yeah,
be any problem.
and that's what I feel like the first, what most of people's C and D letters end up
Right.
what
And
comes from.
I'd also add too, just because they send you a cease and desist letter does not mean that they're right. Like it does not mean that and I'm just saying this for myself, for other people, that I'm saying that I'm not like, I don't consider myself a bootlegger who gets dinged every once in a while. It's like I do aim towards doing parody, and they also know they send a cease and desist, I'm gonna have to spend a bunch of money to fight it, and I probably only made $4 off of this print over 5 years, and it's like, what, I don't blame them.
Yeah.
If I invented the Flash, I'd probably be kind of protective of it too. So. But I do think with Garfield, I mean, it's kind of different by intellectual property, but I think Garfield kind of relies on this fan excitement about it to kind of keep the brand alive. Because I said before, like, as much as I love it, I don't think that at its core, it's as interesting as it is the emotional stuff that comes off of it and the excitement people get over it in the parody. I don't think the stories themselves are as compelling as the character and the feeling.
Right. I agree. And I think that's it's something that a lot of brands are more concerned with these days. The fan base, the fan response, like people's critiques of it, they're actually listened to a lot more. And partly because they have more platforms to
Right.
have but it's still like it's kind of it makes me as an artist feel a little bit better just knowing that I have enough of a following that they probably wouldn't want any sort of backlash, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And I
That's a
think
good point too. Yeah.
like
And I think,
you don't want to seem like the giant evil corporation when you're putting out cartoons. You want to seem like the friendly, like
right.
any corporation.
And I think too, the one time I got pinged on one thing, I don't want to be too specific about it, was because I sort of combined it with a hip hop image.
Mhm.
And I noticed on the same sites they didn't take down other characters, that other parody things. I think it was because, okay, well, now you're taking this into a more adult world. Like it was a mashup between those two characters. And I think too, if you're doing like Garfield urinating on Calvin, urinating on the Chevy thing, which I guess actually probably is parody now that I say it, but it's like not something racy.
Yeah, although I have done plenty of racy. So I mean I think definitely if someone wanted to find objectionable content in my work, they could, but I don't know. I mean, luckily I'm small enough that people who are out looking to ruin other people's lives haven't ruined mine yet, you know?
I feel like those days are there was a time where, I'm a hip hop artist too, where like you had to be super careful about every sample you put out there, because like someone's out there gonna find it and send you a bill. But I think people are a lot more realistic now, that it's like, well, the problem is 10,000 people are making $1 off of this. So what are we gonna do? It's not like one person's making 10,000. It's like, and
Right.
it's like they sort of discourage these companies. They go, it's like at least someone's talking about us, because it's like these brands do die. I mean, I had a conversation with someone about Ninja Turtles, and I'm like, I cannot believe we're still talking about Ninja Turtles in this day and age, because like so few things last over time, and things that are super successful, just people lose interest. And if people stop talking about it and stop being excited enough to actually make this stuff and keep it going, because like Bugs Bunny, who cares about Bugs Bunny now? That was one of the talk about this new Space Jam movies, like in 2000 whatever. Kids don't relate to Bugs Bunny. We all still have a little bit of Garfield in us, but I don't think we have as much Bugs Bunny in us anymore,
Well, but that's because I watch old cartoons all
Yeah.
day.
I think someone pointed out to me that the character, the Deadpool, the character is a cross between Bugs Bunny and the Terminator. And every time I see him now, I'm like, wow, that is really exactly what it is. And that's sort of the legacy of Bugs Bunny to some degree to me.
I think if Bugs Bunny had ever gotten really mad, he could have terminated somebody.
Probably, yeah. Like, and it was funny that I was listening. There's this podcast about how did this get made, and they talk about bad movies. So they watch
Mhm.
a bad movie and kind of joke about it, and they watch Space Jam, and they said that the creator is it who's the creator of is it Chuck what's his name, who
Chuck,
created
Chuck Jones.
the Chuck Jones, that's what it is, yeah. That he, I guess, was mad about Space Jam because he said that Bugs Bunny would never bring in other people to help fight his battles. And that was what he really, and like it's funny, it's like you could say, well, that's sort of like ridiculous, but this guy understood what made the characters work. And so many of these characters get taken outside of the little box you need to see them in that really makes sense in, and then it doesn't work as well,
Yeah.
you know.
Well, it's what was the like? There was like Baby Looney Tunes
Oh,
series,
Tiny
and
Toon Adventures. That though is a great show. I love that was done by Steven Spielberg. I would love that show. But I'm betting there's a lot of, and I love Muppet Babies, but I'm betting there's a lot of people out there who, were just like, what is this?
I'm wondering, yeah, did Frank Oz really love Muppet Babies?
Oh, God,
Like
no.
can you control your creation once it's out in the world, or is it sort of? I mean, I kind of feel like at some point you have to be able to let it go and let it change. Let Bugs Bunny bring in
Yeah,
the
bring in
whole.
Jordan to help fight his battles and bring in Newman from Seinfeld. Great movie. Speaking of the Muppets, that was another one too that was huge for me. That
But
I was talking about this on a recent episode where like it's when you actually see like a documentary on the Muppets, it's kind of weird to see just how flimsy the illusion really is. It's really just a dude with his hand up something that like is limp when it's not, and it's like it feels so real to life, and they always feel like they're really could be in the real world, and it's magical in a way, you know.
I grew up watching the Muppet Show pretty seriously. We had my parents had recorded it on VHS off of TV, so it had all the commercials.
Yeah,
And I would just watch it over and over. I think one of the great things about that show is that because of that kind of thin line between the handful of felt and foam and the person inside it, there's kind of something for the all of the guests to really respond to,
yeah.
and you ones that really have that sense of play that really can engage, and it really is magical, that show,
It must have been hard, as you're saying that. I'm thinking about what it must have been like for someone like Carrie Fisher, or I'm guessing like the
you know
Carpenters or something, to come on, and like for us at home, it's all the magic is all happening, but to actually talk to
yeah.
this thing while someone else is sitting there. There was a Saturday Night Live sketch where Justin Timberlake was singing a song with Kermit. And as the song goes on, the guy who's doing Kermit starts like bumping him, and it turns out an all-out brawl between Justin Timberlake and the guy doing Kermit. It's one of the funniest things I've ever seen. But yeah, the Muppets for me, I remember that was, I think, one of the first things I remember ever watching on television with my parents. It was that and like Dukes of Hazzard Friday nights, like eating popcorn.
Hmm.
It's
Yeah. Oh, and
amazing.
it had a great heart to it. It was this cast that was trying to make their own show happen each time, and you had the backstage stuff going on, and it just was really like a kind of amazing portrait of a group of people making art in a work of art, like all the characters are members of the, or they work for the theater. It just I don't know. I guess I love it when there's just, artists on screen.
Yeah. There's something about the Muppets that's very inspiring to me, because I said before the suspension of disbelief, or like the whole illusion is very thin, is that it's important for people like, the Muppets. So there's some people who look at home and look at the Muppets and go, I could never do anything like that. But when you actually break down what's happening, it's not highly technical. It's not even highly expensive. Like it's like it's not as hard as it looks, I guess, if you have the heart to push yourself to doing it. And I think it's a good lesson to learn, that you like to bring something inanimate to life is only, it really doesn't take a lot much more than your imagination and just a little bit of
Yeah,
thought, you know.
that's things I love the most is getting to interact with people who want to be creative and haven't found a way in, or people who are kind of just discovering making their own art or writing or something like that. I used to work at an art supply store, and I would host these events. And it just was this incredible feeling to kind of figuratively and literally give someone the tools to take something out of their head, or their heart or whatever, and make it real so
Yeah.
that they can. And it just was like, yeah, that there are things out there now that just really, I feel like I'm just rambling here.
No, no, it's funny. You're the last person I interviewed was an art therapist, and we talked a lot about just what art can do for you from an emotional perspective, and when you're in a time of crisis, and it not only connects you with, most people were given crayons as a child. If you had no other toy, you probably at least had a pack of crayons
Hmm.
and something to draw on, even if it was a wall. And like, just the act of picking it up and doing that brings you back to that place, and it also, it occupies your hand and it occupies your mind, and it makes you less likely to pick up your cell phone or pick up a cigarette or pick up whatever. And it puts you in almost a vulnerable yet safe spot at the same time, where, and I think it's a very powerful thing for people who maybe want to be creative but have trouble getting going, that it's to be guided into that spot is a very powerful thing, you know.
I I always love to encourage people to try
Right.
because you never know, And I had really I wasn't planning for anything to happen when I started doing these Garfield drawings. I just started posting them because I was making so many of them, and it just seemed kind of fun,
Yeah.
and nothing really been that fun in a while. And that it was amazing to me that that could kind of build into something so unexpected and wonderful in my life. And
Was
I
the
kind
Oh, sorry.
of, oh no, I just am saying I think for people to have that kind of creative agency does so much more than you really even imagine it would,
Yeah. Was your growth exponential, or is it kind of more steady? Because like, was there like a moment where it was like, okay, I have about, maybe a couple hundred people paying attention, and I woke up and like, oh my God, that was like a lot more. And now I have to see how that's
It's been
I was in this group where they blew up this guy's this father had retired, and he wanted to have a popular cheese toast blog on the internet, and
uh-huh.
his wife and his daughter just put something in this really popular group I was in, that's just, I forget what it was about, in Facebook, and like thousands and thousands of people signed up right away, and everybody was super excited because this guy was so nice, and he didn't know what to do. He was like, am I being made fun of, or these people really like me? And like,
Yeah,
I could watch over the course of the week him not knowing what to do, but now he's like super pumped and he's selling cheese toast t-shirts, and it's like the most warm-hearted thing I see on the internet. I
that's
brought it up like 4 times in this podcast, so sorry.
no, no, I haven't. I like it's actually been a pretty gradual growth for the most part. When I've done events, sometimes they've gotten. The I did a podcast about a year or so ago, the office hours one. And that kind of that's probably the one that I've gotten the most people who have said, "Oh, I started following you because of seeing you on office hours," you
You
know.
heard that, Articulate Ox listeners? You heard that? You have a challenge.
Um,
Beat office hours.
it was, and honestly, it was like one of the most awkward experiences of my life. But it was kind of, I was just like, I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna paint this, and like it was fine. But anyway, that was the thing that probably, and that was only a couple hundred people, really. I mean, I think if I were more interested or more savvy on social media, I'm sure I could grow it faster, But I've always kind of been afraid in a way that it's something that's so meaningful to me, and
Right.
I kind of almost don't want to rock the boat.
Well, the other thing too is like the logistics of blowing, like scaling any sort of business is tricky because I hit a point when I was selling my own art where I'm like, and I hate to sound like and there's a lot of people out there that have probably struggled to sell art and didn't. I hate to sound like what I'm about to say is, but I've got an order. I'm just like, the packing of up and all of this doesn't even feel like it's worth it. And it's just like it becomes like I my life isn't set up to handle it's set up to handle this level of business, but if it gets bigger, then it doesn't I can't even do the basic elements of it. So you want to
Well,
have some control of.
I'm feeling that now, and not even it just it's a disorganized creative person.
Yeah.
It's not like, I don't know. I'm lucky that I had a lot of retail experience, and I had a lot of like shipping experience in previous jobs.
Mhm.
So I kind of had a little bit of an idea of what to expect on the back end, but there's just a lot of unseen work, and no one's gonna congratulate you for it. You just have to freaking do it.
Right. It's like just like I moved into my house a few years ago, and my girlfriend moved in here about a year, maybe less than a year ago. When she was moving in, I was going through all this stuff, and I found all these like boxes that I only saved because they were vaguely shaped like a canvas. And I'm like, okay, if I happen to sell a canvas this size, I'm gonna have this box because when you sell one, you're like, how it's like you it's like finding that perfect box becomes like, Lord of the
Yeah,
Rings. It's
yeah. And then you're like, wait, I've got like 80 boxes under my bed for some reason. Like,
right.
like, yeah, it's
It looks like
it's
you're constantly moving.
yeah, yeah. I just moved out of a really tiny place, and it had gotten to the point where I just wasn't really able to be productive in the space because there were just too many things happening there.
Yeah, my last move was like I moved out of a small apartment in the beginning of the pandemic because I was just like I'm gonna get out of here. And then now I'm like, okay. But I still have too many canvases. I gotta start. I don't know. I'm thinking about some of the stuff that you do, which I think is cool, is the sort of the thrift store paintings that you'll put something into. I'm gonna start doing that with some of my own paintings, or I take some of my old ones that like maybe I would go to a thrift store, but I'll just sort of add in stuff to it into my own. I mean, that's my new idea.
I I've been thinking about that too because I have a lot of paintings from grad school. I did an MFA and everything, and my work was totally different then. And now
Yeah,
I
I was gonna ask you about that. What were your original ambitions with art? I mean, it's if you have an
uh
MFA, you certainly, you know your
yeah, I
stuff.
paint. I wanted to paint. I had a lot of friends that were a couple of years older than me and in New York, and they had just kind of hit the timing right where they came out of grad school, got shows, and were able to have a pretty, you know, decent living off of making their art as a serious practice. And I thought, oh, that'll be easy.
Yeah,
And I
that
can,
was a good time for it though. And I'm guessing this is what like 80s, 90s in New York, like the Basquiat years.
well, no, this was like when I was in college and
Oh,
stuff,
okay.
but
Oh, there. Yeah.
still like it was, things that were really going great before 2008.
Yeah.
And then like again recently, yeah, it's just sort of sometimes you're fortunate as a creative person and you're living in a time when there's a market and it's growing and this and that, and it's I've definitely had to make some adjustments to keep
Yeah.
being an artist. Like I'm living with my parents now. Um, and I kind of I'm really pretty happy with the trade-off. You
Yeah.
know, I need to do this project for whatever reason, and I just have to keep doing it, you know?
That's something that I love hearing too, is that I reach this point where, art becomes something that not that you do because you want to, is because you have to do. And I'm working on this long-term project where I made this my new hip hop album. It's called Drinking Songs for Children. I worked on it years ago, and then I put it down for 10 years, and I picked it back up in the quarantine. I went out and got a lot of my favorite rappers that I've been fans of for years to appear on it. And then and I developed this character named Ox that's like my Garfield, and I'm making a film that was inspired by Garfield's Nine Lives.
Oh my God.
Right. Which every life is a different version of Garfield. And so in my movie, every video is going to be a different version of my character. And it all
Oh,
came from Garfield's Nine Lives. I forget why I started rambling talking about this, but probably because of this book.
that book is incredible though. And
It
that,
really is remarkable.
it's amazing that they were willing to be that flexible with the character.
Yeah. I
And I
mean,
think,
that sort of setup, that in hindsight, yeah, it's sort of like might have inspired a lot of people to be a little more,
mm-hmm,
think outside the box.
because I
He
never
was a
thought
lab animal in one of these.
that's pretty far out. There's the noir one where he's like a detective in there, right?
Yep.
Uh,
And there's one where he looks like he might be Warhol-esque. There's definitely more adult stuff in this. I mean, not like super, but like
yeah,
there's the '80s, like looking like a woman in a Viking hat on the side of like a van or something. But,
yeah.
oh man, it's yeah. What did you want like what in particular did you study to get for your MFA?
I went to a I like a painting program at Bard College, um, which had at the time a pretty decent. Um, it was a really interdisciplinary program. So even though I was studying painting, I was meeting with artists who were musicians and sculptors and writers, and that was kind of always what I really wanted, was to have a kind of variety of teachers, of input. And so it was great for that. And it was great just to have that time to focus on painting. I was making really, really abstract paintings at the time. Um, and I kind of felt like I I wasn't I didn't feel like I could make figurative painting. I didn't feel like I could make paintings that had, stories in them, or
Mhm.
that were scenes, or I felt like I had to do something that was more intellectual or more abstract or more poetic somehow. And it just kind of eventually it didn't work, you
Mhm.
know. Um and yeah, I don't know. If you
It's funny.
told me
I watched this documentary on Picasso a few weeks ago. And he talked about how, I hope I'm remembering this correctly, where it was basically the invention of the camera that was really made him be like, well, now what good am I? Now I have to do something else. Like in terms of like artistically, because you're like, well, this changes everything. you know
Mhm.
and it is pretty wild how so much of this of our mod like so much of art prior to the past 100 something years or whatever was all based on just trying to record history and remember things as they were. And then there was that, like, we're only about like a little over a century into most of art being ways to express not what is seen but what is felt, I guess, or like bring something new to it rather than just being like, all right, people, you got to remember where this tree was and what this horse looked like, so I better get this down.
Yeah.
We're still new to
Well,
that experiment.
I feel like it's split. Now art isn't beholden to reality. It doesn't have to do that anymore. So it's free,
Yeah.
and um which was kind of my problem, I guess. Yeah. It was too free. And I didn't have, I was making the paintings that meant something to me, but they didn't really communicate much beyond that, or they didn't communicate what I really wanted to communicate, which had more to do, I think, with humor and with finding joy, and with figuring out a way to kind of get through the rest of life. Um, so I don't really know why it works with Garfield and it didn't work with geometric abstraction.
Yeah. I
But it
probably
just,
wouldn't work with Heathcliff either. Like, were you a Far Side fan?
I'm more of a Heathcliff fan than Garfield, I've got to say.
I had a
Like,
Heathcliff lunchbox when I was a kid. I always liked that. Someone on that show always spoke in rhymes. That was like as a like little rap kid, I always liked that.
he was like, yeah, he terrorized the neighborhood.
Yeah, yeah. That must be weird that there was always that thing where like GoBots and Transformers and Heathcliff and Garfield and like two volcano movies coming out in the same summer. You're like, what really is happening there?
Came first. He was the original
Oh,
Orange
Heathcliff
County.
was before Garfield?
He was like 72, 73, and Garfield was like
Wow.
78.
It's like Heathcliff exists pretty much only in our memories at this point. Like
It
Heathcliff, for those who don't know, is sort of like kind of like if you combine Garfield with Fat Albert, I think is almost sort of maybe the tone of it or the feel of it. Maybe I don't know.
kind of like I mean, he was a little more of a like prankster, you
Yeah,
know. He had a larger world too than just the house. He had the whole neighborhood.
yeah,
And
yeah.
follow Heathcliff on Instagram. It's I kind of love where it is now
Oh,
because
I had to look it up. I hadn't even thought about
it's
that.
weird. It's just really weird. There's all these like Heathcliff just I mean it's always been kind of weird. He wears helmets that say like ham on it or gravy. He just has these passions. So the Heathcliff these days is it's very kind of um it's not dramatic, but it's weird as hell. It's really weird. I don't know. You should check it out.
You know what that triggered a memory of me? So they made I read this not long ago. They made a Snagglepuss graphic novel that blew me away. And it was like Snagglepuss and Huckleberry Hound, and I think Snagglepuss was basically playing like a Truman Capote type character, and it was really written very seriously and poignantly, and it was about homosexuality. And DC had started doing some of these comics where they're taking these characters and elevating them to this more dramatic platform, and it was
I,
really quite good.
when did this come out? I can have to
Um,
I have to write
in
this.
the past 5 to 10 years, and I think it might have gotten some decent acclaim too, but it was a Snagglepuss, because I just read it last year, but it had been out for a while. So you can probably get it pretty easily. It's excellent.
I don't have a great memory myself, so I have
Oh,
to
same one.
or else
Yep.
that tomorrow or Escape from Tomorrowland.
Yeah, that's I can't. That movie is just it's wild. It's and it gets pretty weird. It gets pretty bonkers. Yeah.
I really love like people ask me what Garfield stuff I collect, and I don't collect the merchandise very much. I mean, I have a couple things like the little mirrors that they made, but
Oh, like
uh,
one of these.
yep.
I got one of these at Carnival when I was in like kindergarten.
Oh wow, that
This
must
is
have
the,
been so.
this is the old this is the original probably first piece of Garfield memorabilia I ever had, and it still hangs in my bathroom today. So
Yeah, got a couple of those, but what I really love are like the hand painted ones.
oh
You know,
yes,
ceramic forms, or they made cutouts that you could paint, and something about other people's versions of these characters. It's so touching. It's so weird.
yeah,
They remember it kind of wrong, so they've got like the stripes done like in different ways. It just it's pretty phenomenal. It's my favorite thing. So I collect bootleg Garfield memorabilia.
that's cool. Yeah, a lot of the stuff I have is bootleg too. There's so much cool stuff out there. It's
Oh, like there's people making stuff that I just love. So
yeah. So, all right, any other Garfield stuff you want to talk about today?
uh Man, I could talk Garfield for a really long time.
Well, what is your, I know you mentioned the scary Halloween special. Is there any Garfield joke in particular, or any aspect of the character that really makes you chuckle, or that really,
I you, I just kind of like how mellow Garfield is for the most part.
yeah.
Admitted to being lazy he is as a person who's like pretty lazy in some ways. Like I paint all the time, but I'm also pretty I like watching TV,
Yeah. Are you a
Like
cat person?
I am a cat person, but I am allergic to cats.
Oh, that's
And
tough.
since my last cat unfortunately passed, I feel like it's gotten worse. So now when I'm around, I did cat con this past summer in Pasadena,
What is
and
CatCon?
it's a lot of cat fanciers and cats being a
Wow.
people in cat costumes, like any cat related anything.
Oh, I
It's
think how
like
big is that? That sounds amazing
pretty big. There's the yeah, it's like a Comic Con, but just
for
cat.
cats. Oh my
Yeah,
God, that sounds like a
it,
blast.
worlds within worlds, man. It's far out. But anyway, I was staying with a friend with cats, and I got really sick
Uh,
actually. So I feel like a little bit of a poser now. I have a dog now.
it's all right. Hey, there's Odie too. I'm a big Odie fan.
What happened to what was his name? Odie's original owner?
Oh, Lyman.
Lyman, yeah.
Yeah, that was it's funny how in a comic that basically only had like five characters, they're like, yeah, we only need four.
Yeah,
Like,
ditch one guy,
I don't know where he's been. And John never really married Irene, did he? Like the world of
No,
Garfield, I don't think ever really no,
it just
Irene is the female
uh
cat, right? And the vet's name is
cat and the vet's name I always forget. Um
Lynn? No.
Liz.
Liz, that's what it is, Liz. Yeah.
Yeah. Arlene is the weird long necked pink cat that's
Yeah.
I guess Garfield's concubine. I don't know.
Yeah, I remember the first time I saw what color normal was, I was like, mad. I'm like, no, that's not right. That's not the color that I was picturing normal.
What color did you think you should?
I thought normal should have been pink, and I don't know
Yeah.
why. But I mean, I was a little kid, but like, I don't know why. But
Maybe he seemed like he was the Arlene's
oh,
spawn.
maybe, yeah, yeah, yeah. It is funny how they were so willing to make like that Halloween special. Just, I mean, that's objectively, I think, scary for kids. They don't. I don't know. I guess I don't watch a lot of like modern Halloween stuff. I don't know how they sort of do something now that isn't like that. It's still in the spirit of the season. But
Well, they did. There was that Sesame Street where they had the woman that played the Wicked Witch of the West, who's Margaret Hamilton,
yes, what was
come on,
that?
sure. And they actually took it out of syndication because it was too scary. She came to Sesame Street.
I
I don't
remember this.
flown into Sesame Street or something, and then she was there terrorizing them. And she finally, I don't remember how they got rid of her, but it was
Here, a
it was
bucket of water works.
it. I don't think anybody let him know.
Yeah.
Uh, Turned the hose on her.
Yeah.
But
You
oh yeah,
remember you remember like with Snuffleupagus, like, when I was a kid, he was imaginary, and or that we thought he was imaginary. Then at some point, I guess everybody knew he existed.
I don't know. I don't remember that.
Oh,
But I'm
maybe this
80.
could have been a fever dream too.
You might have been ahead of the curve. Got the
Yeah.
info.
I don't know. It's like, I don't know. But all right. I think I gotta read some Garfield tonight.
Yeah, catch up.
Did you see the Bill Murray movies?
Um, I I know I saw one of them, but I was it was like at a bar or
Yeah.
something. So, it, I mean, I'm not a huge CGI person,
Yeah, it's a little
so
weird.
I just couldn't quite get into it.
Yeah.
But also I didn't grow up like a huge
Yeah. Yeah.
show or anything, so I don't know.
Yeah, yeah. It's I don't know, but I was my dream is I always wanted to grow up and draw Garfield. I was obsessed with the idea that they were able to hand draw something that looked like the same every day. And as a kid, to me, that felt like a hill that I would never be able to reach, you know. And you realize it's not that, you know, it's pretty once you concentrate, it's doable. Like all this stuff is doable. It's just you have to kind of like stick to it and actually put the effort in, you know.
Yeah, or do an underdrawing,
Yeah,
which
I know.
I was never. I still am too lazy to do.
Yeah, yeah, you know. And that definitely I started Garfield was also probably the first thing I traced. I was definitely probably doing a lot of like tracing of it and then like but then it also taught you like the all the Marvel books teach you to draw by breaking things down into shapes and that's what like Garfield is just a bunch of shapes.
Yeah, yeah, a couple chunky ovals.
Yep, yep. Couple of big eyes that I think people usually think are breasts because those are the first thing you draw. Because I remember
Yeah,
I used to draw on like the board at my old office, and I would just draw that. And people are like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "Hold on, hold on."
yeah.
Yeah, but all right. Well, we're gonna have your social media stuff at the bottom of this the entire time, and
Oh,
like I said, everybody go check out your work, buy some artwork off of you. It's so cool, and I'm so glad you're doing something to keep one of my childhood loves alive. You know.
thanks so much for having me, man. It's a pleasure.
All right, cool. Well, thank you very much. We'll talk soon.